Hello lovely people, I'm Nicola, this is Stitches and Slapdashery, and I've just got a little thing I want to start out with today, or this might be a little standalone video, I haven't decided yet. I want to show you some of the trickier bits of the Daisy Flower Charity Square by Krochet Krystal. Now I love this square. I have made this a few times before. I've made an entire blanket with it, which is, in my opinion, totally gorgeous. And it has a really interesting construction. The back of it looks very odd. But it's an absolutely gorgeous square, an ingenious design. And there have been a few imitators around, but hers is the original one. It used to be free. I got the pattern when it was free. And now it's $3.50 US, which is 4 something Canadian. And I think it's worth the money. She gives most of that to charity, so that's awesome. So I can't obviously show you how to make the whole square because I do not have the right to do that. But I thought I would show you the trickier bits, because when you first start making this, you're going, what? And you're scratching your head and you're trying to figure out what they mean by the printed pattern. And there is a link in the pattern to some Vimeo videos which help a little. I don't know whether I actually watched the videos originally or whether I just struggled with it until it clicked. But I'm going to show you some of the trickier parts in case it helps anybody to make this square and to enjoy it as much as me. So let's get on with it. When you print out the pattern, it's 4 pages. And at first it looks pretty daunting, but once you get sorted and you've made one square, you'll find it's not so bad. What I did many years ago when I first started making this was I ended up highlighting the nuts and bolts of the pattern. So instead of then having to search through all of the text to find the bits that actually had the crochet instructions for the actual stitches, my eyes were able to skip to the next part that was important. She suggests using a worsted weight acrylic for a charity square. Obviously you can use whatever you like if you're not using it for a specific charity blanket or something like that. I'm using DK today. I'm using up some DK stash. I am using a 5mm hook. When I made that blanket I just showed you, I think it was Red Heart with Love, and I probably used a 6 or 6.5mm. And it came out beautifully squishy and lovely. So what I've done is I've already done the first couple of rounds because they're easy. These are the ones I've made so far. This was the first one. So because I'm using stash and my DK yarn is wound into cakes that are a mixture of colours, because at one point I got excited about using my yarn winder and I just had fun. And because the other yarn I'm using is Lion Brand Mandala, there's going to be random colour changes in odd places. But this was the first one I made. I'm doing the whole flower in one colour and the background in the other yarn. And you can use as many colours as you like for this. You could do the centre in one, the petals in another, the background in another, and that last border round in another, if you wanted to do that. What I'm doing is I'm sticking with one colour for the daisy and one colour for the background, because I'm hoping to make a sweater out of this. So I was trying to limit how nuts it went. But if you know me at all, you know I like kind of nuts. But there you go. And this was the second one I made. As you can see, my pink changed to lavender partway round. Still pretty. And then the next part of the cake was all lavender, and then rather fortuitously the Lion Brand Mandala here changed to white perfectly for the last round of the square. So that was awesome. This method is doing 2 chain and working into the second chain from the hook. It leaves a bit of a hole. If that bothers you, you could always start with a magic ring, or you could cinch it up when you're finished. If it bugs you, it might not. Haven't woven in my ends on those yet. Really, because I'm only using 2 colours, or two cakes of yarn, my tail weaving is going to be pretty minimal on these, which I love, because my last Granny Square project, I had many, many tails to weave in. So at the moment, the next colour in my cake is white, and then I still have more lavender on this one to use. So I'm just going to show you what to do for this one. Now at this point you might be changing colours for your petals, but I'm not. I've done my centre, and then I'm going to do the third round, which is 3A, and that's actually pretty straightforward, so I'll just skip to that. I'll just skip to 3B in a moment, because that's where you first start to get to the head scratching point. You finish this round with a chain 3 and pull up a loop. You put a stitch marker in it so that you don't accidentally unravel it. Now the important thing is to keep this yarn forward, and remember to keep this part forward. It's going to be really weird at first, but the absolute crucial thing is not to let this go to the back and then gaily work past it. So you want to try and make sure to keep that forward. So we're going to start with the second colour now. There's a number of ways of joining in a new yarn, but I just do it the way they say in the pattern. So in this round there are groups of 3. The stitch you need to look for is this single one here, and you're going to put your hook to the left of that single one, and you're going to push this part back so that you're not working over it or around it. And you make 3 chain, which represent your first double crochet, and then 4 chain, which is going to take you over to the next part. I like to just push this tail back through the hole there, because you don't want that in the way. All right, so it's joined in. Now, see how this wants to fall to the back? You don't want that to happen. So all we need to do is work a double crochet to the left of each of those single ones, each way, all the way around. So again, you're going to look for your 1, not your increase, but your 1, and you're going in here. Again, push that back out the way. Make a double crochet, chain 4. Now I know the first time that I did this pattern, I was so confused. It took me so long to figure this out. So now we're at the point here where we've met our chain 3 of the petal color. You want to make sure that's in front, because if you leave it to the back and you get to the end of the round, you're going to have to rip it all back, because there's no way you can rescue it. So put it forwards. Look for your next DC here. Work into that stitch. This is a sort of pattern that it takes a while to memorize it. And it also means that if you put it down and you want to pick it up again a few years later, you basically have to relearn it all over again. I'm going to work my way around to the end and I'll show you what it looks like then. Now this strange thing is what you're left with at the end of this round. All of your background stitches are in front and free of the back of the square, but this petal colour is in front of the work and not back here. So you finish this round by doing a chain 3 in a loop, and then you move your stitch marker over because you're going to go back to the petal yarn. So now we're going to pick up back to the pink and start our next round. Now it's a good moment to put your background colour to the front. You're going to have to make sure this is hanging to the front when you get to it. And you're going to be working into these stitches here. You're basically ignoring your background stitches as if they weren't there, but you have to make sure you're not putting your hook in the wrong place. So these background stitches, these chains, are going to be pushed to the back so that you can then work in here. You can see how I'm keeping them to the back so that my hook isn't going over them. It's just staying in front. And again, we're skipping this background colour and we're pushing this background chain to the back so that we can work in these petal stitches. It seems like a real faff, but once you get it, it's not so bad, and the result is so pretty. It's worth it. Now I've worked my way around and I've got to the point where my chain 3 and a stitch marker from the white round is hanging. If you have it hanging to the back and blast your way through it, you're going to regret it. Make sure it's hanging to the front. And then bypass it and then go into that next group. Right there. You see, I've got this to the front at the end of that round. So the next round is pretty much the same principle. When you're working, you don't want to go around your petal colour, you want to make sure it's pushed to the back. And so just remember, push the colour from that row back, work into your background colour. So as long as you remember to always work a petal colour into a petal colour and a background colour into a background colour, that will be a good way of keeping track, because you're never going to work the white into the pink or the pink into the white. And they sort of interleave as you're going around. As I said, pretty ingenious design. Here's my dangly bit from the previous round. Make sure it's at the front. I think you should have the gist of it by the time you're getting to this part in the square, you know what you're doing. You're working pink into pink, or background, or petal into petal on this round, working into these, pushing that background colour back out of your way. So there's another round following this, which I will also work. But isn't it pretty? And so interesting on the back too. I'm up to round 6A and I finished my petals. So at this point you can break your yarn for the petal colour and you go just back to using the background for the last few rounds. Now I feel like round 5B complicates it a little bit. It's described in a very long-winded way, but basically all you're doing is working 5 DCs into the back chain. So once you start back on your background colour, just need to do one more DC in here. So I have been slip stitching into my chains rather carelessly on this, I'm afraid. I know there's a tidier way of doing it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to show in the final flower. So the next round, she tells you to flip this forward and work into the chain. And as I say, there's a very long-winded way of describing it, but you're basically working a DC right into that chain. That's all there is to it. Now here's where potentially it can get tricky again. So you've done your DCs into this chain here and your petals forward, but now you want to work into these things here. Oh, and I just realized I screwed up. Hold on a minute, let's go back and do that again. This petal needs to come back up because you want to work into this area here. So you have to push these two pink chains from the petals behind. So then you can work into these two stitches here. Takes a bit of manipulation, but it's not difficult. And then once again on your next petal, you're flipping it forward to work into these chains here. I'll just show you the beginning of round 6B. It's mostly straightforward, but you are picking up a stitch at the back of this petal here so that it lies flat. I saw a finished cardigan made from these daisy squares recently, and I felt like they hadn't been following this original pattern because in the cardigan all of their petals were starting to do this, which looked kind of weird because you could see them in profile when they were wearing the cardigan, and I thought maybe they weren't following the original pattern because in this one you're anchoring down that petal so that it doesn't stick up. As I said, it's a pretty clever pattern. So at the beginning of 6B, you just do a chain 2, which doesn't count as a stitch. And you're making a corner. So the round is made up of double crochets and half double crochets and single crochets because you're starting to turn this into a square. So I'm just going to start the first corner and show you how I pick up that petal. Now I'm at the point where I need to pick up in here. So you find your center stitch of the petal, so your third double crochet of this fan, so that would be this one. And you don't work into either of the top parts of the V. You tip it forwards and there's another little bar right there. So what I do is I go in from the top of that bar. So it's right here. And I push my hook down through that little bar and then pull up a loop and finish my single crochet there. So what that does is it holds that petal down nicely to the background. So I'm going to carry on with that round, and I just want to show you what I do at the end of this round. Now I'm at the end of the round, and the last 2 stitches of the round are 2 double crochets. And you do this double crochet, and then you think you've run out of places to work into. However, this chain 2 was just a filler stitch. It didn't count as a stitch. And so what I do is I work my last double crochet of the round into the same spot that the chain 2 came out of. That way you're not missing any stitches. And then you join to the top of the first stitch, skipping right over the chain 2. And so what we now have is an almost square. Now when I am starting round 7, then I'm working my first DC into the same place as the chain. So it starts with a chain 2. And unlike the last round where you put your first stitch into the next place, with this one I work my first stitch right there where my chain 2 was. Right here. By working into this same place here, you fit in your 2 double crochets before the corner, which you need. And then you're working your next stitches right into this chain 1 space right here. So I'll meet you back at the end of the round. I'm at the end of round 7. As you can see, we have a square now, and there's just one more round to go. Now, if you're changing colours for your last border round, you can finish off here, and then it tells you, the pattern tells you to join in any corner space. So because I'm not changing my colour, I am just going to slip stitch over there. So I'm just going to do a couple of not very tight slip stitches to get into the chain 1 space to be in the corner. So here I am in the chain 1 space from the previous round. Now the pattern tells you to start with a bunch of chains to represent the first treble and chain 1 for the next corner. I did that on my first square. I didn't particularly like it. See if I can show you. So if you start with a chain 5, which is like a treble chain 1, faux treble chain 1, it comes out of where you slip stitched here, and then you go around and you do the last double crochet here, and it overlaps the bottom of that stitch, and in my opinion it looks a bit ugly. So what I've done with my subsequent ones is I slip stitched to the corner, and I started with a double crochet and then a treble. So I started the round with the full corner, all 4 stitches of the corner, and that way you don't get this treble and this double sort of crossing at the bottom. So I'll show you what I mean. The way I do it is I'll chain 3, which represents my double crochet, and then I'll work my treble. Of course, these are US terms. So if you're UK, you're probably getting confused right now. So rather than dive straight into this stitch, I've started my round with this stitch, and then when I get to the end, I will finish over here rather than finishing in here. So while I'm finishing off my last round, I just wanted to point out that the reason I do my corner differently is purely dictated by the fact that I am using the same yarn and having to slip stitch to the corner. If you are joining in a brand new ball of colour, it's hard figuring out how to crochet with a camera or a phone in between you and the work. Yeah, what was I saying? If you're joining in a new colour and you're starting with the treble crochet in the corner, you're not going to have that weird sort of crossing over thing at the bottom of the stitch like I'm getting. But it's a good tip to remember if you are doing it the way I'm doing it and you're slip stitching across from the previous round. And you get that weirdness happening. Obviously, I am not the designer of this square, so I have not been able to show you how to make the whole thing. I wouldn't want to tread on her toes by showing you how to make the whole thing, because I don't want to cause any problems. But I hope I've helped if you wanted to make this square to get your head around the unique parts of it that you may not have encountered anywhere else. Now here's another little tricky bit. I'm right near the end of my last round, and because I did some slip stitches here, it's a bit weird to work into, so I usually just like hook the end of the tip of my hook up through the slip stitch. I dislike slip stitches sometimes for this very reason, because they're hard to work into, but it's still a good way of getting over to the corner when you're not in the right spot. And now I'm back to the end. Obviously, if you used a new colour and started with this stitch, you'd have one more stitch to work in here before joining. But I've already worked my corner. So all I have to do is slip stitch into this, the top of my chain 3 from the previous round. And there is my finished square. Quite a plain square for me, isn't it? Only 2 colours, and I had no colour changes in my cakes of yarn for that one. But I think you'll agree with me, it's very pretty. Well, I hope you found that helpful. Do let me know in the comments if you think you might attempt this pattern. And certainly if you want to make it, go and give the designer some love and buy her pattern, because then you're helping her out. Bye for now.